So I just made a video about spiral dynamics. I tried to outline the very basics of spiral dynamics in under 15 minutes. Of course, there's a lot more data in there that could be fleshed out. I left it bare bones just so people get a general idea of some of the concepts that lay behind it. In this video, I'd like to explore a theory that I personally have been working on, was inspired by others. It wasn't as integral concepts seem to emerge, it's many others' ideas, kind of pulled together, or attempts at pulling it together. So in the previous video, I kind of half mentioned this idea of fractals. And spiral dynamics has this one element that's suggestive of kind of a fractal, that is namely the first and the second tier. Unlike integral theory, they kind of don't suggest that's really happening. And it's probably too early to know for sure if it is in fact, but conceptually the idea is that the second tier is an octave up in some ways of the first tier, and that higher octave plays similar notes but in a much more complex way than what the first tier does. So I'm going to explore that idea more here. I've done it elsewhere, but I'd like to try to also make a summary version of this here. So the idea is, if we look through the whole spectrum of development that goes beyond humans into potentially, insofar, at least as far as the Big Bang potentially, if that in fact happened, there seems to me at least to be a pattern that reflects those same notes that we see in the first tier and what we might be seeing in the second tier. So the idea here is we go back to matter, and then the next major leap, you can look at this just in a very broad way as kind of major leaps in development, and most I think would generally agree with this, into life. That's a pretty big leap, most would say. And then the leap from life, I'm saying particularly to reptiles, and I think there's some transitionary processes in there, fish and so forth, but the major place here in my mind is like reptiles. And you can, when I say life, I mean particularly like plant life, and there's some, again, a spectrum there of like very basic cellular life before it gets to like a plant. And then the next major leap would be into mammals. So here I'm looking particularly at mammals with limbic systems, which all seem to have. And then there's a spectrum of that, and some mammals have a bit of complex neocortex, but maybe not very much, postage stamp size for, I think, rats and so forth. But when it gets full blown, then we get into humans, and humans have, complex neocortex, as well as this limbic system, as well as the reptilian brainstem and cellular life and matter. So we're made up of all those major systems of complexity. And that's why I'm saying roughly these are the central ones, because you can fairly easily show how in our human body we have all of those systems in it. And then the next one I'm saying started with sort of technology, at least technology that we use in a self-conscious way, and it's emerging into cybernetics, which will probably eventually have some brain-mind interfacing with our brain. So some people are already considering the cybernetic system is probably going to be our fourth brain. For better or worse, it's a little scary. Any of these major transitions were probably extremely scary, but that's broadly what I'd say are the major transitions here. So now, if you look at those and you place them very generally, very imperfectly in some ways, but generally over the map of spiral dynamics, you see the first two, they don't really have self-awareness. That is, like any kind of very much like self-responsiveness, that is vital life and matter. And in the first two stages of each tier, we kind of see similar things, it seems, in my opinion. beige and purple. There's that raw self has not yet emerged, which does seem to emerge in red, and what I'm going to say does seem to emerge in what would be coral, which would be the third stage in the second tier. And so new self, and we're probably waiting for technology to kind of upgrade that so that we have it. But we kind of are starting to see it with our phones. It's like an extension of our mind to some degree now. Google can kind of extend our minds, but it's not quite integrated very fully yet in our body. And it's going to be a scary leap if we do that, but generally speaking. Okay, and so the next two, so mammals and reptiles. So reptiles we see, they're very much reactive for themselves. They'll fight and flight very well, and sexual acts and so forth, and that being seems to have very much a self-directed kind of will in a very basic sense, at least. And you can kind of see how the red power god, impulsive nature that it is, that reptile doesn't seem to have much for future orientation or past orientation. It's pretty present oriented, as we see with the kind of self-centered, to some degree, nature of red and what I would say coral in some ways. But again, as we go up, it includes all the complexities before. So, and then when we move into mammals, they seem to be a lot more caring of those in their immediate family. To me, that represents more recognition for the past. And broadly speaking, I'm saying that blue and what would be indigo probably, they have a very much a deep history in understanding. And maybe, this is a little bit more speculative, it might relate to our dreaming state. I have some theories on how that might work, but it's just theories at this point. Anyways, and reptiles more this physical orientation. When I say that, this the orientation of the waking state in most ways. Although they do have some degree of sleeping and dreaming, primarily I'd say it's mostly now waking oriented. And then when we get into humans, we start to become sort of tool makers. And if you look at orange, I'd say broadly speaking, it has this kind of sense of progress and so forth. And we can see humans making this progress, one tool built upon another tool built on another tool. And we are taking into control our own evolution to some extent by building technologies on top of them. And it's creating this exponential increase in this technology. And when we start to integrate it, if we do that, then the actual exponentials become part of our own self-awareness, which I'm kind of saying is going to be really driving the second tier in many ways, that integration with the very nature of these technologies in even a bigger cosmic way. Now, this is highly speculative, but I will go there just to get some thoughts out there. So the idea is that even sleeping and deep dreamless sleep kind of go all the way down, even into matter potentially, but it's in a very, very, very simple way. That is the idea that these patterns are kind of integrated into all levels of existence. That kind of pattern of spiral dynamics tiers now it shifts and shakes up itself as it goes through more complexity, and so it folds, it interweaves other patterns on top of its own primary patterns, but there's this general, very basic pattern that seems to be happening. And so in this existence, this is very broad, I'll just bring it up though. In this existence, there is this sort of need to kill to eat. Whether it be just plants, if you're a vegetarian or a vegan, you can get by now in this present world because of the supermarkets storing all these foods. You can actually live a fairly healthy life, being a fairly vegetarian or vegan diet. But we're still having to kill to eat. There's still a death cycle that we're kind of involved in. Whether we can ever fully escape from that? I don't know. But, it seems to be very central to this existence. And through that, there's a sense in which we have to become powerful to control nature to survive. And we're never going to control it because we are part of nature. My finger's part of nature. But, there's a sense in which we dominate it and other people and so forth for these existential conditions. These power conditions in many ways. So if there were a previous universe, I'm just going to postulate this, I think it would be a fairly electrical universe, fairly vital universe, but simpler in many, many regards than this existence, this universe. So, not saying there is, just, this is the functional fitting of this framework. And then if there's a next universe that builds off of this one, in my opinion, it would look, if this holds up, it would look a lot like the blue system. So there might be a lot more truth, in my opinion, to say like the Christian tradition than we might in our modern world give credit for, in that the life of light and life, that banner could be fairly intrinsic to that existence. Again, it's highly speculative, but you still would be kind of building off the framework of this existence. That is to say, this existence is a key step into that existence. But in some important ways, there is a way of living in order, in natural order with existence, so that all of this happens, but you don't necessarily have to maybe kill in order to be there, if that makes sense. But maybe you have to go through this to get to that. So a weird, mind-bending thought experiment, if there is some actual order, nature, a fractal pattern to this. Because that's what it points to me, that we are kind of in, I guess you could say, like, quote-unquote hell, but the highest end of it, if this is true. And then that is a life of light and life that, kind of transcends this. And the natural order would be to move to it so long as we, kind of pass the test. And the test essentially would be, under this thought experiment, understanding that way of thinking to some degree, understanding the importance of goodness, sociocentricity. If you look at blue, social-centric elements are highly important to that culture. I respect you. I put myself in the shoes of the other. I walk a mile in their shoes in some important ways. And, that general respect would be kind of intrinsic to that, and that it could extend to all existence, maybe. That would maybe be the prerequisite to get to that point, to fully sort of embody. If the body of Christ is this existence in some ways, then, to step into that body, you have to kind of be with the body in its fullness of embracing this entire cosmos. It's a weird, not saying it's right, but it's a really weird and mind-bending thought experiment. Be well.